All right. Now let's look at Our Lady of La Salette. Many sedevacantists quote Our Lady of La Salette, or Our Lady, when she said, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. But they do not often mention what she said about the Pope and his successor suffering during this crisis. A hidden and persecuted Pope is what was prophesied by Our Lady, not sedevacantism. The true Pope being unknown was an explanation of the eclipse of the Church given by Melanie of La Salette, also, as you will see soon. Okay? So the true Pope being unknown was an explanation of the eclipse of the Church given by Melanie of La Salette, also, as you will see soon. As I mentioned before, sedevacantists, I've never seen any of them personally, talk about how the children who were at La Salette themselves interpreted the prophecies, okay? And what they themselves said is very important to our situation. First, we see here, the vicar of my son, Syrian his successor, right? That's my addition to explain that. The vicar of my son will suffer a great deal because for a while, the church will yield to large persecution, a time of darkness, and the church will witness a frightful crisis. Our Lady of La Salette, 1846. Note, Our Lady said the Pope will suffer a great deal during this crisis of the church. He cannot suffer if there is no Pope, okay? There is a Pope suffering during this crisis, as Our Lady of La Salette said. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. Of course, that has happened. Rome has lost the faith and is the seat of just, blasphemy, heresy, idolatry, sodomy, filth, prostitutes, garbage everywhere, just filth everywhere. That is what Rome is right now, okay? The next quote. Fight, children of light, you, the few who can see. For now is the time of all times, the end of all ends. Note, the Catholic Church is very small today, hence why Our Lady said, you, the few who can see. Most of the world doesn't even know where the church is, doesn't know about the Pope, nothing. They're wallowing and suffering in darkness. Okay? Next quote. All that I tell you here will arrive in the other century, at the latest in the year 2000. So she even gives a year, okay? It is that specific. She even gives a year just for clarity. It says, note, the apostasy began in 1958. The other century from 1846. Okay? Spot on, accurate. This is Melanie of La Salette from The Secret of Melanie and the Actual Crisis by Abbot Combe, 1906. She says, the church will be eclipsed. At first, we will not know which is the true Pope. She doesn't say anything about sedevacantism, doesn't say anything about, for 60 years or more, we won't have a Pope. None of that. What does she say? The true Pope will be eclipsed because at first, we will not know which is the true Pope, meaning there'll be a false Pope or false popes, as we have today, many false popes. You have the Novus Ordo false popes, you have the Palmarian false popes, you got Conclavis false popes, you got the quote-unquote Apostles of Infinite Love false popes, okay? Tons of false popes. And only one unknown, hidden from the world, suffering Pope, Gregory the 18th. Okay? Just as prophecy said, would happen. Notice here that the eclipse of the church is not sedevacantism. but rather the Pope being unknown. Also, the fact that Pope Gregory XVII's election was hidden for so long, but is being made known to more and more people as time goes on, would explain what Melanie meant by "at first we will not know which is the true Pope," right? But as time goes on, more and more people are becoming aware of the true papacy. And of course, with the age of peace and stuff, the world will actually, become Catholic. Everybody will know who the Pope is, that kind of thing. Like the whole world generally, will know who the Pope is. He'll be a public, visible figure once again. Continuing here. This is a quote. It says, "A more detailed explanation of Melanie of La Salette's interpretation of the eclipse of the church is given here. The church will be eclipsed. The world will be in consternation. But behold, Enoch and Eli, Eli, filled with the Spirit of God, they will preach with the strength of God, and men of goodwill will believe in God, and many souls will be consoled. They will make great progress by the virtue of the Holy Spirit and will condemn the devilish errors of the Antichrist." Abbe Combe, the editor of the 1904 edition, adds the following note after this paragraph. "I have from Melanie that the church will be eclipsed in this sense, that one will not know which is the true Pope. 2, for a time, the holy sacrifice will cease to be offered in churches and also in houses, so there will be no more public worship. But she saw that yet the holy sacrifice would not cease. It will be offered in caves, in tunnels, in barns, and in alcoves." Okay? So no more public real mass. And of course, that is taking place right now because the only so-called mass you could go to would be Sedevacantists, Schismatics, and Heretics, SSPX, Schismatics and Heretics, Novus Ordo, Heretics, Conclavis, I guess, Schismatics and Heretics, But as far as a real Catholic mass given by a real Catholic priest in communion with the real Catholic Pope, basically impossible to find today. Years ago, on their website, TCW posted different, events and stuff like saying there'll be a real mass in this place and, that kind of stuff. But I personally haven't seen them post anything like that for several years now. So as infrequent as real masses were then, they're, I would think, even more infrequent now, and they may be completely just no longer any public masses. It may just be all private, and like as it said here, caves and tunnels and barns, that kind of stuff. Sedevacantist and SSPX masses are public. You could go to one right now. You could Google right now, SSPX so-called mass, Sedevacantist so-called mass. You could go to one right now. But if you want to go to a mass with a real priest, a real mass with a real priest, you can't just Google it and find it like that, okay? It's going to be nearly impossible to find one, as prophecy said would take place here. And Melanie gave us basically a fulfillment of the crisis of La Salette's prophecy. However, masses given by priests who are in union with the true Pope, Gregory XVIII, are few or non-existent at this time, which is in perfect harmony with this prophecy. Okay? And when I say non-existent, I mean, in a public sense, right? They may be like all private kind of things now, private masses now. The true faith, this is Our Lady of La Salette once again, the true faith to the Lord having been forgotten, each individual will want to be on his own and be superior to people of same identity. They will abolish civil rights as well as ecclesiastical. All order and all justice will be trampled underfoot, and only homicides, hate, jealousy, lies, and dissension would be seen without love for country or family. Notes: each individual will want to be on his own and be superior to people of same identity. This may be speaking of the conflicts, schisms, rivalries, dissensions, hatred for each other, etc., seen among SSPX and sedevacantist, so-called clerics, right? They will abolish civil rights as well as ecclesiastical. All order and all justice will be trampled underfoot. Sedevacantists and SSPX are a disorganized mess of self-governing, independent heretics and schismatics, okay? Just a bunch of random people doing a bunch of nonsense is what it is. The Holy Father will suffer a great deal. I will be with him until the end and receive his sacrifice. The mischievous would attempt his life several times to do harm and shorten his days, but neither him nor his successor will see the triumph of the Church of God. Look at that. Note, Pope Gregory XVII died in 1989, so he did not live to see the triumph of the Church of God. Based on this statement of Our Lady, I believe, personally, Pope Gregory XVIII will probably also die before this crisis ends, and perhaps the Pope after him, or another future Pope, will be the first one to rule when the crisis is over. As I mentioned several times so far, there's a prophecy stating that in his exile, the Pope will die a cruel death, okay? And that would once again make sense regarding what Our Lady said here, where she said that neither him, Gregory XVII, nor his successor, Gregory XVIII, will see the triumph of the Church of God. So both of them, I believe, will die before the age of peace. Okay? And that's what Our Lady, that's what I interpret from this here. All right, continuing. Towards the end of the world, tyrants and hostile mobs will rob the church and the clergy of all their possessions and will afflict and martyr them. Those who heap the most abuse upon them will be held in high esteem. At that time, the Pope with his cardinals will have to flee Rome in tragic circumstances to a place where they will be unknown. The Pope will die a cruel death in his exile. The sufferings of the Church will be much greater than at any previous time in her history. Papal Prophecy of Brother John of the Cleft Rock, 14th century. Note, Pope Gregory XVIII and his cardinals, as we talked about previously, after his election in Rome in 1991, fled Rome to a place where they are unknown. It seems that Pope Gregory XVIII will also die a cruel death in his exile before this crisis ends, as I spoke about just now. This is word for word what happened in 1991. The only part missing is Pope Gregory XVIII dying a cruel death. That's the only thing. That's the only part of this prophecy here that I've highlighted that hasn't been fulfilled yet, as far as I'm aware. TCW hasn't announced that Pope Gregory XVIII has been killed or died or anything like that. So as far as I'm aware, he's still alive right now. But if this prophecy is speaking about him fleeing Rome in 1991, then I would assume he's also going to die a cruel death before the age of peace. Now we move on to Maximin. Maximin's secret to Pius IX. I actually like that zoom in thing. That's pretty cool. I forgot that I put that there. All right. Maximin's secret to Pius IX. Before all that arrives, great disorders will arrive in the church and everywhere. Then, after that, our Holy Father the Pope, Gregory XVII, will be persecuted. His successor will be a pontiff that nobody expects, Gregory XVIII. Note, certainly, by the fact that Gregory XVII's election was hidden from many for so long, and his situation seemed hopeless, no one would expect him to be able to have a successor. But by the miraculous providence of God, he does, naturally speaking, people be like, oh, how are we going to have another pope? How could he, have, a successor elected and stuff like that, Naturally speaking, people be like, thinking that. He said nobody will expect him to have a successor or, expect a successor. But by the providence of God, he does. We got Gregory XVII, and then now we have Gregory XVIII, an unexpected pontiff because the circumstances under which he managed to be elected were, naturally speaking, seeming to be, impossible in a certain sense. But of course, nothing's impossible for God.